This is a 2003 Softail that I've had for years, and I just put a breakout front wheel on it. It's something I've done on a lot of bikes as far as putting a more updated rim on an older motorcycle, and it's really not that hard. I've done many of them, and I'm talking mostly just about Softails right now. I sort of have a checklist that I use. I'm not guaranteeing it's going to work on every bike, but I've had really good luck. So I updated the rear wheel on this years ago to a 200, and I did that myself. And the rear wheels are a real pain in the ass, though. The front wheels are very easy. But I sort of have a checklist I use. And one of the first things you got to do is try to get the wheel real cheap, because there's always a possibility it's not going to work. So this wheel I got for $250 without a tire, wheel bearings and rotor. So I knew if it didn't work, I could probably sell it for that much, since it's a brand new wheel. It had like 10 miles on it. And then the next thing is to know the axle size. Do you have a 3/4 inch axle or a 1-inch axle? It's easier if you stay with the same axle size. If not, you're going to have to replace the axle. So it's definitely easier if you have the same axle. The next thing is the orientation of the rim in the forks. You need to take the stock wheel and take a tape measure and measure from the inside of the fork to the center of the rim. You might have to make a mark on the rim, and do it on both sides, the left side and the right side, and see where the rim is sitting in the forks. Now, obviously you think, oh, of course it's centered in the forks, but it's not always centered in the forks. Sometimes it's offset a little bit, and what you want to be able to do is duplicate however it left from the factory. You want the new wheel to line up in the exact same spot. And I'll tell you, I've only had one front wheel on the 6 or 7 bikes that I've done stuff like this. A 2007 Heritage had an 1/8 inch offset in the front wheel, but every other motorcycle I did was dead center. But the rears on the Softails, they're always off. I've seen the offset off as much as a 1/2 inch. So you always want to measure where you start at stock. Measure the stock wheel, make sure it's center, or if it's off a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch, write it down so you know. Then the next thing you want to do is mark your wheel spacers. I always mark them left and right with an arrow pointing towards the wheel bearing. You want to put them back in the exact same spot they came out on. And this is also I mean, most people probably know this, but I mean, it's a real simple way. When you need new tires on your bike, you can probably save $100 if you jack the bike up yourself and take the wheels off and drop them off at the dealer, and you'll get them back faster, and you don't need a ride. You don't need someone to pick you up. And the simplest thing is to mark the wheel spacers. And I'm sure most people know that, but mark the wheel spacers, and it's real easy to reassemble it. And it's a good habit to get into. Whenever you take something apart mechanically, you want to put it back in the same position it came out. So that would be the next thing. Then what you want to do is jack the bike up and take your new wheel, put the axle in it. Assuming you take the old wheel off first, you take the new wheel, you put the axle in it with no wheel spacers, and you bolt it into the forks. No wheel spacers, you bolt it into the forks, you tighten up the axle nut. You just have to hand tight it, but make sure it's socked up so it's not loose, and you put the cap back on the 2 nuts on, and that the axle is properly oriented in the forks. So it's just floating there. And then you lock up the front brake, and the front brake will center the wheel to the caliper. There's no adjustment in the caliper positioning. So that will center the wheel to the caliper. You might have to put some electrical tape on the front brake or something, or you might need a hand, and then you go back through and you measure again from the fork to the center of the wheel, and from the fork to the center of the wheel, and hopefully it is in the exact same spot as the stock wheel was. For this, it was a direct bolt up. Now, if it is centered or exactly where you took the stock wheel off, then you're good. You should be good. If it's off by 1/8 of an inch or something, then I would say don't use it. There's no way to adjust that offset. I mean, I would never recommend putting shims between the rotor and the wheel. So if it's centered, if it started out centered and the new wheel is centered, then I would take the wheel back off and I would put the spacers on it and I would put it back in the forks. You shouldn't have to pry open the forks a 1/2 inch to get the wheel in there. It should slide in. It might rub a little, or there might be a little bit of a gap, 1/8 inch on each side. But this thing was a direct bolt in. I had to do nothing. I've done the same thing with street glides, FLHs. I had a 2006. I put a 2011 wheel on it. It bolted right up. I just had to switch the axle. I had a 2011 that I put a 19-inch street glide wheel, dealer takeoff. No problems. Wheel spacer, everything bolted right up. As far as the rear wheels go, nothing bolts up. Every rear wheel I had to make custom wheel spacers for it. And that's a whole different ball of wax, but I think the front wheels are no problems at all. Just that one Heritage I had had an 1/8 inch offset in the front, but it came from the factory like that. So, and you say why would the wheels not be centered? And why the wheels aren't centered is because of the primary. I'm working on the bike right now, but you know, this all hangs out. The whole primary hangs over the frame. You got the clutch assembly with the flywheel, the chain, the compensator. You got the outer primary cover, the inner primary. You're talking probably 30 pounds worth of shit, and it's hanging out, like 6 inches over the frame rail. So it throws the balance of the bike off. So they have to offset the stuff, the wheels, to get it to track straight. But I wouldn't be afraid. The most important thing is getting the wheel cheap. If you can get the wheel like this, a brand new wheel for $250 that had 10 miles on it, I knew I could sell it for $250 if it didn't work. But it bolted right up. So good luck.